I am Samantha Mowat. I'm a clairvoyant psychic and a contactee, and I'd like to give you a little more information about hybridization and the orchestrated relationships. One thing that I haven't really touched on a whole lot is the selection process when it comes to hybridization. You see, for a lot of us who are going through this process, it's something that has been occurring within our families for multiple generations. Typically, it's been happening for so long, it's probably as far back as you could possibly trace your family, because a lot of these beings have been tinkering with specific bloodlines for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And, it's kind of interesting because, I was born to a family of contactees, and this is relevant in a lot of ways because with the genetic alteration that has been done to my lineage, it makes it so that when we have contact, we have a different understanding and perception of the contact process than that of someone who may be the first person in their family to be aware that they're having contact. So for instance, because of my family, I've been abducted since the time I was very, very small, and this is something that's occurred throughout my entire life up until this point and will continue until death for me. There reaches a certain point where you become very familiar with the process. You start to recognize not only on a soul level that you know these beings from a young age, but you also have things like, it's almost like a genetic familiarity that comes forward. And so what I mean by that is that when you encounter these beings, if my parents encounter them, if their parents encountered this same being, if their grandparents encountered them, there's a certain aspect of recognition that goes on a genetic level that seems to be passed forward like a genetic memory from one generation to the next. And what this does is when you encounter these beings, you have a better sense of familiarity with them, a sense of comfort, sense of understanding. And so there isn't that same reaction with fear, apprehension, and terror that people who haven't gone through this aspect would experience. So let's say I'm encountering a being that has met with my mother's side, and let's say it also met with her mother's siblings and her, and then her grandmother and great-grandmother, so on and so forth, in which case the genetic aspect would be carried forward with each generation, building upon it. And so when it finally gets to me and I encounter these beings who have been encountering my lineage for such a long time, there's a sense of understanding with them because you recognize the vibration this being is emitting, and there's a sense of comfort with it, which makes it a little bit different than what a lot of people understand. So for someone on the opposite spectrum, so let's say you are someone who's going through contact, and let's say that no one in your family has really gone through contact, and you don't know if your aunts or your uncles or your parents or your siblings or your own children or your own grandparents haven't gone through this process, in which case for you encountering some of these beings could be quite concerning. It can be overwhelming, and you might approach it from a place of fear or a place of complete uncertainty because you're like, oh my goodness, what is happening to me, and what do these beings want, and what are they doing, and why am I finding myself being taken physically out of my camper, or why am I being taken out of my home, or why am I being taken out of my hotel room, and things like that can occur. And so if you're someone who is new to this process, it can be really overwhelming because you really don't understand on a soul level exactly what's happening. You'll have to excuse my throat. I'm just getting over a really wicked cold. It was not very fun, so I know I sound kind of funny. So I might have to pause the video a few times to just cough. But what I want you to understand about all of this is when you're looking at it, there's a lot of factors that they take into consideration with hybridization. And part of the thing that they look at is which bloodlines are really fertile. So what I mean by that is I'm from an overly fertile family. I'm one of four with my siblings. My parents have I think 12 brothers and sisters, which is quite a few. And, that's not including my aunts and uncles' spouses, that's just including my direct family, and that's not even counting the cousins and what have you. And so, because we have that factor in place, as well as the fact that I'm a twin, means that my likelihood of having twins is actually amplified and increased. So they look at the aspect of the fertility component, they're like, okay, so we've got this going on, and we've got the twin aspect, and we have a very fertile family, and we have the psychic component being passed on, and the genetic memory of these abilities coming forward, and there's a lot they really do look at with hybridization. They also look at it, and they try to program you to an extent from a young age. Pardon me. So what I mean by that is programming's not always a bad thing. Programming can sometimes be done with psychic or telepathic suggestion to encourage you onto certain lifestyles and certain paths. And so for me, I was a really weird kid. My least favorite food in the world was pizza, and my favorite food was salad. I know, really weird. And so because of that, I realized now that had to do with these beings programming me towards wanting more of a higher vibrational food, food that was more akin to keeping my body in a certain state. And I think that's wonderful now, but as a kid it made things kind of weird. I also want to mention the fact that part of the reason I'm in the hybridization program is I don't do any drugs. I do drink very little alcohol. They do things like they'll modify your body in such a way so that when I do get sick, I do tend to have ET contact, which is wonderful because even in the last week I've had contact coming in to help heal my lungs to deal with the bronchitis that I just had, but also to help make it so that I don't need to have a lot of the same medications other people would have because they'll modify your body in such a way that it's healing it and returning it back to a state of higher vibration. They also look at some other things, as I talked about in the last video, where because I have no signs of mental illness and because I'm more mentally stable even on a psychic level with them, they feel safe having me around the hybrid children. So there is always that component as well. I do know that because I'm O negative and because my parents are O negative, that does have a bit of a contributing factor as well, although I have met people who are going through their own contact who are of positive bloodlines, although they don't typically tend to be the ones that I'm bred with. From all the men that I know that I've been bred with, they have all been typically negative bloodlines when it comes to the creation and production of hybrid children. So it's kind of interesting how it works out that way. So I did want to mention about that part. Pardon me for one. Thank you. And so one thing that I did want to talk about with all of this is, they really do follow their bloodlines quite closely. They really do pay attention to not only how they're doing, so for instance how their contactees are doing, but they'll pay attention to when the contactees are coming up onto craft. How are these contactees interacting with the various extraterrestrial multidimensional beings they're encountering? When they're encountering them, are they having good telepathic communication? Are they reacting in such a way that shows a calmness, a sense of understanding and connection with these beings? Or are they feeling as though they're not quite having that same understanding? Is there a block in place? Is there a sense of trepidation occurring? They do take that into consideration as well. Because what they're looking at is they're seeing with the humans, are they having a level of connection with the adult ETs that is safe, consistent, and a sign of stability? And the reason why they take that into consideration is when these humans are meeting the hybrid children, the hybrid children obviously have more fragile bodies than that of typically the humans. So unless it's, well, with most of the genetic components and most of the genetic mixtures, they tend to be a bit weaker. But it's a little bit different because normally I'm talking about ones that are more of like the gray, Arcturian, stuff like that combinations, not necessarily the reptilian human hybrid children or the Lyran human children. Those ones tend to be a little bit stronger. So it really does depend upon the genetic mix, but they do still take into account the way the human is interacting with the adult ETs when they go through these experiences. And the reason they're doing that is if they deem you to be stable, they will start to introduce you to your hybrids, which is a really wonderful experience. In my experiences, as I've encountered my hybrid children and I meet them and I get to know them, there's a sense of accomplishment and joy when you meet these hybrids. And not only are they healthy, but they seem to be growing well. They are having this energetic vibration coming at them that only has the ET aspect, but it also has the human aspect. And so part of the reason why they have the humans coming to meet with the hybrid children is they're wanting for the hybrids to have this not only understanding of their human heritage and like ancestry, but it also has to do with the humans having a different vibrational structure than that of the hybrids and a different vibrational structure than that of the ETs. And so a lot of these hybrids are actually raised on craft. And so the primary aspect that they are exposed to is the vibration associated with the ETs and the multidimensionals. And so when they're having the humans come up and interact with their hybrid babies, and quite often you'll meet them when they're babies, either developing in sacs, or you'll meet them when they're newborns, or you'll meet them when they're toddlers or small children, and they'll try to get you to bond with them. Quite often with my hybrids, I will pick them up and I will sing to them, or I will hug them, or I will rock them. And there's this aspect of connection that they're wanting to see. And the reason they're wanting to see that isn't just for the human benefit, but also has to do with the hybrids really doing much better when they have that connection to their human parents and that human bonding. And so The reason why I'm bringing this up is even before you give birth to a lot of these hybrid children, if they're ones that are going to be incarnating onto the planet Earth, you will meet their souls beforehand, and this could be months or years of you meeting these children before they choose to incarnate. You'll quite often meet them on craft or in a multi-dimensional setting, and at those points you'll end up having, you'll sometimes see them in their ET bodies, or other times you'll see them in the human body that they're going to be incarnating into, and sometimes you'll just see them in their energy body. And so what these little ones do is they're trying to get to know your vibrational frequency, and they're trying to give you the suggestions that are needed for you to shift your body and your lifestyle in order to be of a better compatible, pardon me, a better compatible energetic vibration to be able to host the body as it's, host the soul as it's developing in the body. So what I mean by that is when you are someone who is going through hybridization, if you have contracts in place to have starseed children, then your vibrational field has to be within a certain vibrational range. And by being within that vibrational range, you are able to host the soul of the hybrid child in a way that is compatible and healthy for it. Whereas if you fluctuate too far out of the range this way or too far out of the range that way, then you're no longer in this vibrational frequency range. Pardon me. And so what they end up doing is they start giving you almost like suggestions beforehand of things you need to shift. And so, for instance, before I had my first children, my body had to go vegetarian. I had to have very little alcohol in my body. I had to be doing things like yoga and meditation because I had to raise my frequency in order to host them in a way that was going to be healthy for their own vibrational field to come into place. And so there were those components. And then with my next set of child or children that are coming, I have to shift my vibration again to being even higher because their vibrational field is even beyond that of the children that I already have. That my vibration has slipped lower than what it was 10 years ago. But that's because of other encounters taking place. And so these beings will be giving you messages and suggestions of things that they need for you to do. They'll often have you meeting these hybrid children who are going to be incarnating in your astral projections while you're going up onto craft. And they can often have them even coming around to your home to see you, which is kind of interesting. So what I mean by that is with one of my hybrid children, it was kind of funny because I can't remember if I was taking off my makeup or if I was putting on my makeup, and I was just in front of the mirror, like I think I had like a face cloth or something on my face and just like washing it, and I've got my phone on, I'm just listening to music, and it was kind of funny because I look in the mirror in the reflection and there is this little skinny gray type being staring at the mirror that's behind me and at me, and of course I startled and I was like, oh my goodness, someone's looking at me, and it just kind of freaked me out in that sense. And because the spike of energy that I had come out, this being started to run, and he started to run away, and as soon as he started to leave, I'm like, what the hell, or oh my goodness, or whatever. I wasn't actually scared, it just startled me, and I knew I was being silly, so I went to the window and I tried yelling it, going, hey, come back, and of course he was too far away and he couldn't quite hear me, so I sent a loud telepathic suggestion of, come back here, I'm not afraid type thing, and he came bounding back. And it's kind of funny when you start to really get to know the Greys and some of these other beings, because they don't always move in the way people expect them to. I've seen them quite often in a froggy type position where it looks like their legs are kind of bent off to the side, and they seem to be like bounding away, which is kind of interesting. And so anyways, I noticed that there were two of them outside, but only the one came back to me. And when he came back to me, he came back as quickly as he had left, but he came in through the window, and as soon as I saw this little one, I picked him up, and I had his arm, like his head on my one arm and his feet on the other, and I was holding him like this, and I was rocking him back and forth. And it was really nice to stare into his eyes because I knew that he was one of my hybrid children. And as I'm looking into his eyes, I'm singing to him one of the songs that I love singing to my children. And it was really quite a beautiful experience to have with one of my hybrids, where it's on more of a conscious capacity. And, you'll actually have them coming to see you in this manner if they deem you to be someone that isn't going to hurt them. And so that is one thing I'm trying to help a lot of you have better understanding of, especially for those of you who have hybridization. Because when you have these hybrid children coming from you, it's really no different than if you're meeting your other children, because you care for them in a very similar capacity to what you would your earth children. It's just a different understanding that you'll share with them. And so, there's always that component as well. Oop, just one moment. Thank you. And so, there's other aspects I wish people would really take into consideration with all of this. When we're looking at the hybridization component and the way it differs from what people understand is quite often when you find yourself going through orchestrated relationships, whether it's find yourself on craft and breeding with someone who's extraterrestrial, multidimensional, or breeding with another human, you can find yourself in these hybridization experiences where you may not even be aware that you are something like pregnant. And so, relatively often, I will find myself going up onto craft. And while I'm there, I tend to notice that I'll be like in a chair or something like that. It's kind of like a recline type chair, and it seems like it's floating. It's kind of shaped like a bean of all things, in the sense that it's got like a rounded back and a very like smooth, gentle front. And it's kind of interesting because you'll find yourself suddenly like laying reclined, and you'll notice that there's like this being in the corner with you, and there will be someone who's normally sitting beside you. And quite often it'll be a being like a gray who will be projecting into my mind the image of my husband or someone that I'm going through bonding and pairing with when it comes to my ET contact. Um, and what'll happen is there'll be like a smoky type energy in the corner of the room that's just out of my peripheral. It'd be like 10 feet away. But this voice will often be the one who's talking to me. And it's more of a medical type component or capacity. Pardon me. And so what I mean by that is it'll be a being either like a tall white, or it'll be a tall gray, or it'll be a mantis who's there monitoring the experience. They're checking to make sure that everything is working on a medical level. And so it's kind of interesting because I'll see something like an orange orb coming up out of my uterus, and it'll be the soul of the being who I'm pregnant with, and it'll be floating in the air. And quite often they'll tell you, how far along you are, whether this baby is viable, whether it's going to be staying with you, or if it's going to be taken out in a few days and raised on craft. Quite often they'll discuss that with you. It's kind of interesting because when you have these things going on and you find yourself on craft with this, it often does have diffused lighting to it. You'll find yourself being very comfortable and calm with the experience. I don't normally have anxiety attacks when it comes to hybridization related to stuff like this because I feel as though I'm safe and have a certain degree of control within those situations. And so, because those are going on, I feel fine with them. Normally, they will end up taking the baby out somewhere between the 4 and 6 week mark, which is completely normal. It can just be kind of funny when you find yourself on craft and sometimes you won't even be aware that you were pregnant, and I'll have to look back at my other encounters going, okay, so when was this? When could this have happened? In what experience do I think this is most likely connected to? And so normally I'm pretty good at being able to pinpoint that. And so if you are a woman, it is of your best interest if you're going through hybridization to really track your cycles, to record your experiences, to record what day they happened, and if so, what occurred during that contact experience. Because I find that it often seems to have a strong correlation. And so, it's interesting when you have beings that are kind of obscuring their physical form like this, because it's not necessarily being done with a malicious intention. Quite often they're doing it just to keep you more comfortable, because if you suddenly go from having a gray being who's got like a couple fingers on your shoulder, because there's some sort of pressure point or something around here that they quite often touch, and it seems to put me in a calm state most of the time. And so if I'm laying down, whether it's like on a medical examination table or if I'm sitting on a chair or something like that, they'll quite often have like a finger or something like right here. Like it seems like one or two on the front and then something else at the back, and I don't know what it does exactly or exactly how they do it, but that's just kind of what I've noticed, and it seems to keep me in a more docile state. And I've seen them do it to other people, and I've also done it to other humans while I'm on craft. And so the reason why I'm bringing this part up is when you look at the aspect, like the mantis being that was doing this to me in this encounter, it felt like it was being loving towards me. It was telling me about the energetic ball or fetus that was now floating above me, and I remember seeing the energy going back into the body after. And it's kind of funny because when you become pregnant, your aura actually goes to this like really pretty orangey yellow color anyways. And so to see an orangey colored mass of energy, like an orangey yellow one, floating that's about the size of like a grapefruit and having like this swirling energy moving to it like this, it was really fascinating to see that component because it's looking at things on a different level outside of what the clairvoyance normally shows us. And so I find that to be incredible. The one thing that I remember this mantis being talking to me about with that one baby in particular was I remember feeling that he was developing well and like this child was healthy, and I remember feeling very pleased with that process. I felt like I was excited that the energetic aspect was doing really well. And so one thing that is kind of common for contactees, we'll often get to meet our unborn children, and occasionally when these babies are removed from our physical form, they're doing either genetic alterations to the mother, or they're doing energetic alterations to the mother's physical form or her energetic form, and normally this is done with the best intention for the mother and the baby in mind. So I think that's a really wonderful thing, because they're monitoring the energetic vibration of the child while they're having this energetic shift or frequency being done to the mother. One other thing I want to mention about with hybridization and how it's a little bit different than from what a lot of people tend to understand is, in my own hybrid experiences, quite often you'll see hybrids at different stages of development, and you'll often see them with things that are a little bit different that are going on. So in some situations I'll see the fully developed, fully already born hybrid child. Other times I'll see almost like an amniotic sac with like a fetus developing in it. Other times I'll see the energetic aspect of the baby. It really depends, and I'm not sure if this has to do with the different species, if that's why, or if it has to do with the different hybrid combinations. I've been trying to figure that out. But in one of my other hybrid encounters, it was kind of interesting because I found myself, on craft, and I remember it was more of a physical encounter, and when I was there, this being passed to me, these two amniotic sacs, and I think it passed them one at a time if I'm not mistaken. And so I'm holding these sacs in my hand. I remember looking at them and thinking, oh my goodness, it's about the size of an ostrich egg, and it's partially see-through, and it's got like a thicker membrane, or like a thicker outer shell, but it wasn't quite hard like an egg or something like that. I remember knowing it was kind of like really pliable and very soft still, and I remember thinking it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. And contained within it looked like there was this developing ET human hybrid, and had a really large head. It had almost like, not only did it have like a really, like I have had kids, so I've looked up what the developmental stages are with babies at the different week marks, whether it's the size of like a blueberry all the way up through a raspberry, through an orange, stuff like that. So I'm pretty aware of what the stages of the human development are, and this did not look like a human developing embryo or fetus. It looked more ET in nature, and this is because it had very large black eyes. It had, just the way the body was formed, it did look more delicate than that of like a human. And I remember when I looked at this thinking it was very beautiful, and having this sense of like overwhelming sense of joy and contentment, and feeling of like my heart chakra expanding, because I was so proud of how these two were doing. I remember looking at them going, oh my goodness, like look at my babies, they're doing so wonderfully. And I remember when this was happening, I remember thinking that they were not only very healthy, but I remember thinking in my hands going, oh my goodness, I normally wear rings, and I was worried that the rings that I was wearing were going to puncture these amniotic sacs. And so I remember trying to be very careful with my hands, and trying to be very careful as I held on to these babies. And so I remember as this was happening in this encounter, my vision was quite limited. I couldn't see beyond a few feet away. It was almost like everything was kind of like squiggly or hazy, and I think this has to do with them allowing for me to have a certain degree of visual awareness in my immediate vicinity, but not for that for my external. And this may have had to do with the like multiple beings being present in the room, and the degree of monitoring that was going on. Now, for them to do this, it's interesting because normally they'll have you introduced to your fetuses if they are needing to have more of that love base or different vibration coming forward to help them to develop to a greater capacity, to help them if they're having a degree of struggling or not quite thriving to the extent that they're hoping. And I remember there was a being present in the room with me, and I remember asking her who the father was. And I remember asking just about, okay, well, they're mine, that's great, but whose else are they? And I remember her passing me this ring and kind of like taking the egg away from me, or the amniotic sac, pardon me, away from me, and kind of redirecting my focus. And I remember thinking, it's kind of interesting that they'll do stuff like that, because there's a certain degree of answering our questions that they seem willing to do, yet there are a certain number of things they don't seem as keen to answer for us. So, there's always that component as well. You might actually be kind of curious going, well, how can you recognize if a hybrid is yours? How can you know for certain if the hybrids that are being presented to you are actually your hybrids and not someone else's hybrid? And, that's a really good question, but there seems to be a vibrational frequency that is emitted from each of us. We all have a unique vibrational signature, and it's almost like the way our aura or energy vibrates around us on a soul level. Even though we go from body to body with our incarnations, you know, a lot of these beings don't actually need to put implants in us to find us. They recognize us by our unique vibrational signature. And the same thing can be said with our hybrids, because the children that we have will have a vibrational signature that contains a component of our own. And so if I'm, for instance, operating at a vibrational signature that, let's say, is a C, and let's say the person I'm being bred with is a B, then the vibrational signature being emitted by our hybrids would be like CB or BC or some combination of such. And so you kind of have like this sympathetic vibrational frequency and underlining like energy system that seems to be connected through them and that seems to really come forward. And it's almost like I've recognized something in them as being a part of my own, is the best way I can describe this. It's almost like the same way that you can tell, it's like the bond that you share with your children. There's something in it that you recognize, a sense of familiarity and connection, but also a sense of, it's like an aspect of love. It's a very hard thing to explain, but you recognize it on a soul level. They feel like they are a part of you. You know, it's kind of funny when you start to get to know your hybrids and you start to realize just how many different types of species of children you have. Because yes, a lot of mine, I have met a lot of my gray hybrids, I have met quite a few of my Arcturian hybrids, but it's kind of funny when you start meeting ones that are, you know, reptilian in yours and human in yours, because you'll look at them sometimes and you'll be like, I know you're one of my kids, but sometimes when you meet like your human hybrid children, you kind of wonder like, okay, is this a past life memory? Is this a current life one? What's going on? It can be a little bit difficult to differentiate exactly what vibrational signature is being emitted and trying to place it when it comes to the humanoid aspect. Whereas when it comes to my reptilian hybrids, I know that I do have a couple of black reptilian hybrids, and you know, they're actually really nice guys. Both of them are male. I'm actually a fair fan of them because they're very stoic and very proud, but they're also, how can I explain this? They still have a sense of honor to them, and I do feel safe with these guys. The thing that I notice is they appear to be more like, the best way to describe it is their energy seems like it's late teens, early 20s, and so to me that is more likely hybrids that I had in my, like, maybe 15 years ago. I don't think as far back as 20, but just judging by the way their bodies are developed, they seem like some of my older hybrids. They seem like they're much closer to maturity than that of some of my other hybrids, just in how delicate my other hybrids' bodies are and the way that they feel younger on an energetic level. And so there is that component as well. I don't remember the creation of them, but when I met these two, I remember knowing that they were mine. And I remember feeling a sense of love and connection to them. Now, it wasn't a romantic love, it was just a sense of kinship and a sense of that they were my children. So it was really quite an interesting experience. Whereas with my Arcturian and white hybrids, it's a little bit different. We were camping this one time. It was kind of funny because I woke up in the middle of the night and there's like this yellowy orangey light kind of coming in. It was really quite beautiful. It looked like everything was quite bright outside. And the tent that we had like an oval type hole to it with like a zipper section where you could like zip over here and open the whole thing up except for like this tiny little section. And I remember waking up and seeing that there were these three white beings in the tent with me. And I remember being surprised that my dog's not awake and that my husband's not awake and just going like, oh my goodness, like, what's going on? I didn't even hear you guys come in. And it was kind of funny because they're crouched down, they're super close to me, and like they've got these really big like black eyes, and they're so adorable because they kind of have like a bluey type essence to them, and they're crouched down and they have these little frail little bodies, and they're just so close and like right in my face. And I remember with this going on being really excited by it because they had this tremendous amount of love and like playful energy kind of coming through. And the next thing I know, like my vision goes black and I don't remember a lot more about that aspect. But a while later I woke up and then there are a few other different hybrids in the tent. They also have very pale white skin with them, and they do have like those large black eye shield covers that are going over top of their eyes. But these ones had like hair that was kind of long. It was quite straight and kind of like frail or brittle looking. It went to about their shoulder, not quite their shoulder, like kind of like a bob length again, but it was more like an orangey kind of red auburn color rather than like a deeper, darker red, like how mine's more like a reddy brown kind of color. But it wasn't quite as light as like a strawberry blonde or like a ginger. It was kind of more orangey, which was quite interesting because I've seen that shade of red a fair bit on different hybrids. And so it's kind of funny because I have this one hybrid who's like crouched super close in front of me on the sleeping bag, who's like literally right right on my lap type thing, and then I've got one that looks like he's kind of like just walked into the tent and he can stand up because he's so little. He's not big enough to actually hit the top of the tent, which is kind of funny because tents aren't very high. They're like 4.5, 5 feet tall, so he's quite small. And this other one's just kind of crouching to come in, and this other one looks like he's kind of like hopped in. And it's kind of funny to have them like so close to you in such a close proximity. And I remember having them with me for a few moments, and then I remember my vision going black again. And so, you know, it's kind of funny when you have these things happening because you get to meet all the different hybrid babies that you have, and you really get to sense like a sense of familiarity and comfort with them. It's quite a beautiful experience for the most part. It can be a little confusing at times because with these aspects you'll go through a lot of frustrating body experiences, especially when you find yourself getting pregnant quite frequently, because there is the usual aches and pains with early pregnancy aspects. So I mean, there is that component as well. And when they do take the fetuses out of the body, of course it does make quite a heavy period typically, and it can be very uncomfortable in that situation. But you know, it's really not that bad in my experience from what I've had, although everyone does have different experiences, so I'm definitely not trying to discredit or downplay someone else's experience. So my lungs are really bugging me, so I'm going to cut this video short, but it was lovely talking to you. I hope that gives you a bit more of an idea of some of the diversity of the hybridization aspect. I think next time I'll go into more of the orchestrated component. That way you can understand how the orchestrated relationships are interconnected and related to the hybridization aspect. I wish you peace, love, and light. Bye!